Good to have you going down the road with us here on Beck News. In a little bit, we're going to be joined by Rick Becker. Rick is running and challenging, I should say State Representative Rick Becker. He's going to be challenging United States Senator John Hoeven for that spot on the Republican ticket in the fall for United States Senator. He's not going to the convention. He's going directly to the primary. And so we'll ask him about that and a host of other things about why he thinks he's a better candidate than John Hoeven. But first, we get a chance to visit with United States Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer, good to have you coming down the road with us.
It's good to be down the road with you. Thanks, Joel.
We were talking before we started here about the silly season and how it never seems to break, it seems like, out there in D.C.
Well, for sure. I mean, everything's silly. The season is now a year round. In fact, you barely get the non-election year off anymore, especially when you throw in things like big Virginia governor's races and whatnot in the non-election year. Everything's sort of in the same flow, and it can be a little bit frustrating, to say the least.
You were constantly raising money, just like any Democrat and Republican does anyway, but it's gotten a little wild, I'm sure, when it comes to that. I want to get to some issues that you knew I was going to raise, and I'm sure you're ready to answer. Over the weekend, the Republican National Committee chose to sanction Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, both United States congressmen, for taking part in the January 6th committee. Going as far as calling what happened January 6th legitimate political discourse. I need to know from you if you agree about those two things, Senator Cramer.
Well, first of all, I think the RNC is out of their lane. I don't understand why they, even feel compelled to censure two individual members of the United States House of Representatives. As I like to say, it's having spent 6 years in the House of Representatives, the people's house. It's the people's house because it belongs to the people and because, it was created so that each member has a similar constituency. They have 2-year terms, and like I like to say, their performance evaluation is year round. And that's the beauty of the House, is that the oversight and the responsibility to replace them lies with voters, and they get to do it pretty frequently. So that's a pretty good structure, and I just don't think the RNC ought to be messing with that. I think it diminishes the RNC. I think it diminishes the people's house. At the same time, I certainly have some sympathy for the RNC's position as it relates to Adam and Liz's participation in the January 6th commission, because the Speaker of the House further diminishes the House of Representatives when she rejects the Republican leaders' appointments to the commission and replaces them with her Republican members of the commission because the others were, quote, too pro-Trump. That's not how committee assignments are supposed to work in the people's house either. So, but I just think from an RNC perspective, it was wrong. With regard to the terminology, I think it was a very clumsy, very poor choice of words to consider all of January 6th. And that's the implication, of course, that all of January 6th was legitimate political discourse or behavior, because although it might have been legitimate political discourse to a point, as soon as somebody illegally broke into the United States Capitol, it stopped becoming legitimate. Then at that point, it becomes criminal. And a whole bunch of people followed suit. And while not everybody participated at the same level, in the same way, there's nothing about it that's legitimate. And quite honestly, Joel, I think you probably know this about me already, but I get frustrated when people either try to diminish what happened on January 6th as though it was just sort of a rowdy school tour group. It clearly was much, much more than that. At the same time, it was, it wasn't the armed insurrection, headquartered out of the Situation Room in the White House either. But it certainly was serious and should not be validated.
Well, let's talk about that, because you found yourself the face of a lot of stories on national TV. When a story broke that Mike Lindell had asked you to come to a meeting in regards to delaying the Electoral College vote, and what options were available to the president to go ahead and get voting machines. There were a lot of questions nationally. Number one, what you were doing at the meeting. Number two, why, if you knew they were doing that, why you didn't speak to it. So there's a couple more questions for you, Senator.
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First of all, I did it at the invitation of Mike, and because, frankly, I remain open to any thoughts that people might have or any evidence that they might have. In fact, I specifically requested before that meeting that they would bring me specific evidence. In other words, give me a list of 1,000 dead people who voted, and they brought no evidence. They brought theories. Most of the people that were there weren't invited, frankly, by Mike, and the theories that they were floating just weren't plausible to me. None of them could change the constitutional responsibility of a member of the Senate or the vice president. With regard to speaking openly about it, I've been speaking openly about it for quite some time. It's just it's not been interesting until the Washington Post decided to do an expose about the meeting, and even they had to basically conclude that even Donald Trump nor Mike Pence took any of what they were trying to advise them to do. What they were trying to advise them to do had less to do with voting machines, frankly, and more to do with employing the NSA to do a data sweep to try and find foreign influencers communicating in the United States. That's objectionable to me. First of all, the NSA shouldn't be used that way, and nor should they probably have the type of data that they have. But that's another whole debate. And if the president was going to employ that, he chose not to. I didn't share that information with the president. What they wanted me to do was try to get the president to do that. I chose not to do that. And by the way, one of his attorneys was in the room. So if that attorney thought that it was important that the president could do this, I would guess she would have told him.
Senator, it ends up coming down to really a yes or no question, which is, do you believe that the election was stolen? Do you believe that it's legitimate? And I think I know what your answer is to this, but I think that the people need to hear your answer to this. So do you believe that the election was stolen?
I don't believe it was stolen. I've restated that many, many times. Clearly, the pandemic created an opportunity throughout our country for states to loosen their requirements to vote, to loosen some of the enforcement mechanisms, making it easier to vote by mail, making it easier for one person to gather several ballots through ballot harvesting, made more drop boxes available because people understandably didn't want to gather necessarily in small places for an extended period of time. While a lot of that was legitimate, the concern certainly was legitimate. It does provide opportunity for mischief. As you know, Democrats in the Congress have tried to codify all of that loose election process, and Republicans have resisted that, fortunately, because these are the responsibilities of states. I do think there were some states, I think Pennsylvania in particular, where they actually violated their own laws and their own constitution. But I think it's really clear as people. I oftentimes get calls, as you might imagine, when I do talk radio from people that'll ask this question. When I give that answer, they get mad at me and they'll say, "Well, how could he have gotten 81 million votes?" Things like that. It's like, Donald Trump inspired a lot of people to vote on both sides, right, for him and against him, and it was quite an experiment. But we should leave these decisions up to states. I think states are doing a good job in many cases of tightening their own election security laws, and that's appropriate, and that's where it belongs.
You mentioned talk radio, and of course I do that as well. And I want to compliment you because when we make a request for you to come on, you come on. And you know that I'm going to ask you tougher questions than what some talk show hosts might ask you. That's just the reality. But Senator Kramer, I do want to ask you this. On January 6th, there was a talk show host in the Capitol. His name is Scott Hennon, a very conservative talk show host who organized a number of people to go to, some might call it a rally, some might call it an insurrection. I'll get to that later on my opinion. I heard your opinion today. But from the Capitol, inside the Capitol itself, while this, let's just agree it was a riot, while this was going on, he was videotaping and going live that it was from someone close to the Senate that the cause of all of this was Antifa. So that raises two questions. Number one, was he there as your guest? Number two, was it you that said that it looks like the cause of this is Antifa?
Well, it certainly was not me who said that. I didn't have any intelligence that would provide that. Nor I don't know how you could have, frankly, from our vantage point, because we're inside the Capitol. He wasn't in the Capitol. He was in a Capitol, one of the office buildings, and locked in a room in an office, of course. So I don't know about that. In terms of the live, I think, video feed or broadcast, I presume it was him on his cell phone or something like that. But I don't think it was of the crowd or anything like that.
Was he there as a guest of yours?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, he was. He wasn't there as a guest of mine, but he was in my office as my guest. I said, stay, you're welcome to use my office, sit in my office if you want. And that's what he did.
Okay. I want to speak to a little bit about going back to January 6th, and I have to ask you this.
Sure.
Were you subpoenaed by the January 6th committee?
No, I've never been.
If you are subpoenaed, will you honor that subpoena and go in front of the January 6th committee, whether that be privately, whether that be publicly, to testify in front of them?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to see the subpoena if it were to happen. I maybe would. Quite honestly, I think the January 6th commission is illegitimate in the sense that, again, the Speaker of the House dictated the members of the committee of both Republican and Democratic, and I think that invalidates the whole commission in terms of its seriousness. I think it's proven to be exactly what we thought it was going to be, and that is simply a tool to politicize and keep January 6th alive. I quite frankly think the interest in January 6th is pretty well confined to a few political activists in Washington, Capitol Hill reporters, but I maybe would. It wouldn't be hard. It'd be easy. But again, they wouldn't learn anything new from me that they haven't heard many times before if they've been paying any attention.
Do you believe in any way, shape, or form that the Capitol Police are a part to fault here, that they weren't ready? That
well, I think their leadership.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think their leadership is at fault, that they weren't ready. They were outnumbered. They certainly were overwhelmed by just the volume of people. They weren't well prepared. They didn't have good equipment. Their terms of engagement were woefully inadequate. And the buck stops with the Speaker of the House. She's the leader of the infrastructure in the United States Capitol and all of the employees. So the buck stops with her.
But I have to ask you, while I wish there would have been more there, while I wish there would have been the National Guard there, why should that be? Why should they have worried because of a political rally by the President of the United States with the comments that he made? Why should they have anticipated that he was going to rile them up to the point where they were going to storm the Capitol? Well, what about it made all of us believe that we were going to see people that were there building gallows, screaming out that they were after Nancy Pelosi and, I might add, Mike Pence?
Right. Well, first of all, because we now know that there was intelligence implying that might be the case. Not anything about the president's rally, but that there were outside groups that could be dangerous, that had some intention far beyond a rally several blocks away, and they didn't share that intelligence. That intelligence didn't get to the right places, and that's a pretty big problem. So if they'd had that intelligence and it made its way to the sergeant at arms and police leadership, then maybe they would have had more people there and had better equipment.
But Senator, there are people who believe you had that intelligence because of your meeting and because of your meeting in regards to what.
Wait, Joe. There was no. I didn't go to a meeting about the rally. I went to a meeting where the people.
But at that meeting, they were discussing options in regards to what they could do to delay the Electoral College vote. And of course, the Electoral College vote was happening that day. Yeah, and so with the Electoral College vote happening that day, and the attempt by the president to delay that vote, it plays into what those strategies were, which means
not even a little bit. That's like suggesting that somebody's predicting rain in Asia and therefore be prepared for a flood in Washington, D.C. They were presenting.
But that's my point about the Capitol Police, Senator.
Yeah, but this has nothing to do with Capitol Police. This has to do with the National Security Administration, the NSA, far from the Capitol Police, and utilizing their data, their ability to gather data to see if they could find or to identify foreign foreign interveners in our election. That's
but
far different than
Senator, it comes down to who orchestrated that, who wanted that, who pushed for that.
Well, good question. But the interesting thing is the president never learned about it because they wanted me to share it with him. And I didn't share that with him because he'd already made the decision not to go that far. That's what's interesting. All of this really exonerates Donald Trump. That's the interesting thing. He didn't do any of these things that they were suggesting that he do. He chose not to do them.
Well, one could argue that he directly called for it during the rally itself. But we can go back and forth on the January 6th committee. Let's take a little break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, more with United States Senator Kevin Cramer. He hung with us, ladies and gentlemen. We still have United States Senator Kevin Cramer as our guest here down the road. Senator Cramer, the big political news locally here in North Dakota is that somebody from your side of the aisle, a North Dakota House of Representative, Rick Becker is going to challenge John Hoeven, United States Senator, a man you see pretty much every day. Did that surprise you as much as it did me?
It surprised me a little bit, Joel. I have to admit. I always thought Rick had some, ambitions for statewide office. I think he's been pretty clear. He's run for governor in the past. I think he's, when he stepped down or decided not to seek re-election, people assumed he's maybe had something else in mind, but I didn't expect it to be this.
Okay. Are you going to endorse either candidate? Are you going to endorse John Hoeven is the best way?
I fully support Senator Hoeven. He's done a great job. I see no reason to, for a Republican to run against him, but everyone's welcome to. That's the great thing about our system, and none of us are entitled to these jobs. But yeah, John's been obviously an important mentor to me, an important partner, and I think a very good senator for North Dakota.
If you look at the endorsement of Donald Trump, that plays a major role in a number of states. I would make an argument that the Republican Party, once you talk about legitimate political discourse from the RNC, has become Donald Trump's party. That being said, when you look at these two candidates, John Hoeven, Rick Becker, certainly the one that plays into the narrative of complete loyalty, though, to Donald Trump would be Rick Becker. President Trump came out, ex-president, or former president, let's say it that way, former President Trump came out and he was mad. He was mad at you and John Hoeven for voting for the infrastructure bill. And when he gets mad at somebody, he usually stays mad at somebody. Do you see him getting involved in this race, knowing him as well as what you do?
Yeah, I personally don't think so, Joel. One thing about Donald Trump, he calls me when he's mad at me, and we have a really good, robust discussion for about 5 minutes before we go to the pleasantries. And he's always been very supportive of me and always restates that support for me. You say that Rick's loyalty is more in line with Donald Trump. I actually don't believe that. I think Rick's his statement and why he's running is contrary in many respects to Donald Trump. He talks about the rising debt. He talks about, big spending. Donald Trump, he talks about the last 10 years. Donald Trump was 4 of those last 10 years, being disastrous. So I don't really see him endearing himself to Donald Trump, quite honestly, other than the fact that he's a disruptor. He's a bit of an outsider, all of that. And Rick's a quality guy. Don't get me wrong. I like Rick. I think he's a good legislator. I always liked the libertarian strain of our party. I think that our party in North Dakota, in many respects, is grossly mishandled. The libertarian wing of our party. I've always embraced them. I think you win elections by addition, not subtraction. So again, I welcome Rick into the race, but I strongly support John. I think John's much more in line philosophically, frankly, with Donald Trump than Rick is.
So let's look at the race itself, though. Do you think that with as far right as what North Dakota has become, that Representative Becker has a chance? And if not a chance, do you think that he can garner 40% of this vote or close to it?
Oh, yeah, I don't know, Joel. I mean, who thought Ed Schaefer had a chance of becoming governor? And look what he did. So anything's possible, especially in sort of the volatile times that we live in. But I think when you size the two people up and their philosophies and their accomplishments, you look at what John has done for North Dakota in the United States Senate, I think it becomes very difficult. Just because you're the second choice, even if it's a small margin, doesn't mean that you weren't a close first close to being the first choice. So I would expect that, Rick will, he'll give it a great run. He'll be a good candidate. But at the end of the day, when people take a look at the two, I think, John prevails. And I don't think Rick loses any respect over that.
I want to talk about that far right wing of your political party. There's people going out, and the North Dakota Farm Bureau is orchestrating meetings. They held one in New Salem. They held one in Bowman. And the people that are or I should say Dickinson, that affected Bowman. But they're holding these meetings talking about how the federal government is going to take farmers and ranchers' lands. Have you seen anything out there that shows that the federal government is going to forcibly take anyone's lands?
Well, whether it's forcibly or through regulation or even things like this administration, Joel, has become very aggressive with things like guidance as well as regulations that little by little, if they don't take the literal deed to your land, they take some of your control over it. Waters of the U.S. is the most classic example of it. And then you take things like Fish and Wildlife Services imposition on waterfall production areas and things like that. There's no question that there's a reason to be concerned. I mean, let's face it, it was Joe Biden that came up with 30 by 30. While they've modified that in recent times, they've started adding local parks and things to try to get to their 30%. It's something to be concerned about, and it's best to stop a train before it starts rolling downhill. So I applaud them for raising awareness to this.
But you talk about whether or not the 30 by 30 is in fact a takings when it comes to government land. I've seen the proposal, albeit they are looking at different ways to get to a 30%. Whether I support the 30% or not, it doesn't take land. It puts it in a position where farmers, ranchers would voluntarily sign that land up, no different than CRP. So both you and I came into politics in the same era. We did. We're the same age. We're both Wild Rice Conference guys. You grew up in Kindred. I grew up in Hankinson, Matador country.
To the degree we grew up.
Yeah. There's something to that. So let me throw this at you. When you hold these meetings that you just said that you support, and you put individuals in a position like Trent Luce. Now, you might not know a lot about him, but this man has a criminal record, and he's shouting that people are government's going to take your lands. Coming out of the 80s, you can see the damage that can do in a very dangerous realm. So you support these meetings?
Well, I support meetings in general, absolutely, and I support freedom of discourse, and I oppose shutting meetings down and shutting down people's opinions and shouting them down and canceling people. Absolutely, I do. But I actually do think there's something to be alarmed about here, Joel. It's easy to sort of dismiss something as just a small increment intended to do good and talk about things as voluntary. The reality is, if you want to have the best stewardship of the land, if federal and otherwise, just turn it over to a farmer or a rancher whose living is dependent upon it, and you're going to have the most sustainable parcel of land.
Senator, I don't disagree with that. You know my position when it comes to that. What we're talking about and what I saw in the details of the 30-30, it's voluntary for people to sign up. Well, I would recommend to many not to sign up. And how they deal with their land is their right to deal with their land. I also would not support someone going around saying that the federal government is taking your land when in fact that's not the case of what the proposed legislation is. Sure. And when you do that, Senator, you're putting people in a position where they get riled up about the thing that they care about the most after their family, which is their land. And it's just not true.
Well, I've met with a lot of landowners, including in large groups, with members of the past administration and the current administration, who've been very kind and nice to come out and meet with North Dakota farmers, whose great grandfather or grandfather signed an easement, a waterfall production easement, only to not necessarily lose the title to their land, but to lose a whole bunch of the productivity of their land because their grandfather signed an easement a long time ago under duress, and the worst possible things have happened to them as a result of their own freedom and their own land. So this is a very real scenario created by an overreaching federal government that is proven to be worthy of the concern that that are being raised by people that oppose 30 by 30.
So you believe that this administration is conniving in a way to take away people's land? That's a yes or no?
Oh, I think that they're more than capable of that. Many
I didn't
people
say
within the
capable. Do you
administration.
believe that they are planning on taking people's land?
I think if they could, they would love to, Joel. Yeah,
Okay.
I do.
The
And that's
plan
why
doesn't
that's
say
alarming
that,
to me.
Senator. The
No,
plan.
the plan says let's just take a little bit of it. Let's just take a part of your living off of this land. Let's just take a little more control of it. Yeah, there's reason to be concerned.
But you have to sign up for it. We can go on and on this. I just
like great grandfather signed up for the waterfall
It
production.
scares me when you know, people that have felony charges are out there stirring things up, and I think another day we might pay for that.
Well,
So
legal theft by the federal government may not be a felony, but it's theft nonetheless.
well, legal theft by a person standing in front of me saying, you know what, this could happen, is something I don't trust. So, Senator, good to talk to you. Thanks for giving us time.